Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tenpenny Files. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. The Tenpenny Files isn't just another podcast. We have daily discussions with guests whose research has discovered evidence that challenges official narratives and commonly seen headlines. Topic spans a spectrum from national government, health, astronomy, travel, food and fitness, to vaccines, health and health policy. And we have discussions with authors who write about faith and biblical principles. I want to introduce you to topics that you've never heard of and topics you wish you'd had more time to explore. For listeners ready to question mainstream stories that you've been told, the Tenpenny Files is the show for you. Join us here every day at 3 p.m. Eastern Time to hear from authors and documentary filmmakers who have something important to say but have often been silenced and censored. But before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to encourage listeners to support this broadcast by going to primemembership.drtenpenny.com, primemembership.drtenpenny.com. Check out our three-part membership. It's for $25 a month to keep us on the air and to keep us bringing you really timely podcasts. So with that, today's conversation is with long-term writer Jared Knott about his book, The Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Tiny Mistakes That Changed the World Forever. Gerald, welcome to the Tenpenny Files. Thank you for joining me. It's good to have you here today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you so much. You know, on our previous podcast that we had, that was called This Week with Dr. T, you were on that show, and we talked about your first book, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, 39 Tiny Mistakes That Changed the World. It was really a runaway bestseller. What compelled you to write book 2 of Tiny Blunders?
Yes, well, I wrote book 1. I didn't realize there was going to be a book 2, but the sales were so good for book 1 and the demand was there. And history offers us this rich treasure trove of mistakes. Okay, when you dig into it, it's just amazing how many tiny mistakes there are throughout history that led to disasters. So we had plenty of material and a demand, and so it just naturally followed through. It was a lot of fun to read about it, research, and to write. And we have, just as one example, we have 3 different examples in history where somebody, for different reasons, forgot to close the gate to a fortress or left the gate unlocked, and that led to for example, the collapse of the Constantinople, which was the last vestige of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire collapsed and failed because somebody forgot to lock and close the gate. Elon Musk sent out a little teasing cartoon. It showed a soldier in bed with a cartoon with his blanket pulled up and his helmet on, and a little bubble over his head showing his thoughts. And it said, "Did I remember to lock that gate yesterday?" And of course, the answer is no. And the Turks, the Ottoman Empire that conquered the Roman Empire there at Constantinople, were a little bit offended because they took that 1453, they took that very seriously and didn't think it should be teased or made fun of. But that was just one of the items in book 2.
You know, you say that you talk about about this gate being left unlocked. How did you verify that research and know such fascinating details?
Yeah, it is well documented, not just through Elon Musk, but throughout history. It was, that was what took place. The fortress there at Constantinople, it stood for more than 1,000 years, very well designed, very well built. It stood 23 major attacks over the years. It had never fallen, but it's a deeply entrenched fact of history that the gate was left unlocked, and the enemy discovered that and came pouring in. That was one of the factors that caused the last vestige of the Roman Empire to collapse.
Well, you know, your entire set of books, book 1 and book 2, have fascinating and obscure historical details. So let's apply the same concept. How did you research these details and where did you find them?
Yes, well, I tell people that I sometimes may forget where I put my keys, but my mind is a trash bin of trivia. So all the stuff that I read, I can remember stuff that I read 30, 40 some odd years ago that was, I didn't think it could be any particular use, but then when this came up, I started searching my memory. And also, to answer your question, the internet, unlike people 50 years ago or 40 years ago, is this rich library, this rich, easily accessible treasury on any subject you want to name. And it will give you chapter and verse, it will give you very well documented sources, et cetera, et cetera. You can get 5, 10 articles about a particular subject very easily, unlike people writing books 30, 40, 50 years ago, going to the library and that library didn't have the books you wanted and you went to go to another one and so on. So that has been a big asset to me and any other author that needs research being done. And it's really been fun and enriching. And talking about different perspectives, I make the point in the book that in our history class, they usually talk about major events. So here's this king, here's this battle, here's this big treaty that was signed, here's this big invasion. All that's perfectly appropriate. But my book kind of turns history sideways and looks at it from a different angle, from behind the curtain and behind the scenes. And what you find back there is example after example of a tiny mistake that dominoed and multiplied and boom, 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 and boom, here's this cataclysmic result in the end. History is just rich with those little small mistakes that aren't mentioned in the big summary of history, but were very, very powerful in determining the outcomes.
You had 39 events that you categorized in book one. How many are in book two?
Well, I have 32 chapters, but within those chapters are sometimes 4, 5, 6 mistakes that are listed. And then sometimes it's hard to know whether a mistake is a big mistake or you consider it a small mistake. But there's some 35, 40 some odd mistakes all sloshing around in there in this great big kettle of fish there in the book. I think the book is a lot of fun to read and a lot of novelties. I have a couple of comic relief chapters. Wrong with Corrigan is a fun chapter to read. That's chapter number 3. And then the Bismarck itself, the sinking of the Bismarck, is a very good example. It has a number of mistakes on the British side and a number of mistakes on the German side. Mistake, back and forth. And finally, it was the Germans who happened to have the most number of critical mistakes versus the British, but the British sure had a whole bunch of them in there, one including the Ark Royal aircraft carrier. Just one quick example is planes took off. They were old biplanes, World War I. This is the early part of World War II. Okay, and they were told there were no British ships in the area, and they went out to looking for the Bismarck to drop their torpedoes against the Bismarck. But the Sheffield, the British ship, Sheffield was there, and in the storm, they confused it for the Bismarck, and they dropped their torpedoes against the Sheffield and would have sunk one of their own British ships and created a disaster. The Bismarck would have gotten away, but they were lucky. They were using a new version of torpedoes, a magnetic triggering kind of device, and they all failed. Okay, so if they worked successfully, they'd have sunk the British ship, the Sheffield, total disaster, and the Bismarck would have gotten away. But okay, so they realized the mistake, go back to the Ark Royal, switch the torpedoes out for the old contact type torpedoes, take off again. This time they find the Bismarck and they fire their torpedoes, and they were lucky to hit the side of the Bismarck and did some damage, but the other one hit the rudder and happened to hit it at just at the right angle so that Bismarck could only travel in a big wide circle. It couldn't get away. It was just about 10 hours away from the cover of the Luftwaffe on the shores of France, but they were trapped. They could went in circles, and so then they were helpless and eventually were sunk. But that was a series of mistakes. There's other mistake, just this one little mistake here, it was my mistake here, and it ended up in the final outcome.
Well, those are great stories and gives us a little bit of a highlight. Can you come up with 2 or 3 other stories where the tiny blunder had massive global consequences?
Well, let's see. The one that comes to mind, I can give you one. Let me give you one that had a major impact on the history of the Southwest. Let me start with that one there. And that one, of course, that collapse of the Roman Empire had a major impact on history. It's a big one by itself, and then also scurvy. That's another. But let me give you one. The teaser is the teaser is this: what outrageous character bought stolen horses from the Comanche Indians using counterfeit money? What could possibly go wrong? Okay, this set off when the Comanche came back for revenge. This set off a chain reaction which had a major impact on the history of the United States. John Wayne later played this outrageous character in a John Ford movie with the help of Natalie Wood. And if you go to my website, Tiny Blunders, BigDisasters.com, I have 3 different Instagram reels there, run about 30 seconds each. And that particular story is there with John Wayne and Natalie Wood. And it was James Parker, the whole story there. But that was one of the cases where somebody left a gate open and the fortress fell as a result. But that's another example there. And then there's also the scurvy is one, and medical mistakes. It's these, we don't talk just about war. One of the things that was so stunning is that before germ theory had been established and proven, we had people discovering that there was something, tiny particles of some kind, causing disease to spread. There was a doctor there in Vienna, and he was just couldn't sleep at night. Just so life was hardly worth living because he had two different hospitals. One that was run by midwives, the other one was run by medical interns. The ones run by the medical interns had this horribly high fatality rate for young mothers coming in to deliver babies. The one run by the midwives, much lower fatality rates. You couldn't, for the life of him, figure out what was going on. And then there was an unlucky accident that ended up being lucky. A colleague of his had his hand pricked by an instrument that had been used to operate on the cadavers. Okay, and then he gets the same kind of disease that the women got in the clinic there that came there to deliver babies. Well, there's something in these cadaverous particles, is what he called them in the beginning. It causes this illness, causes this disease. So he discovered that if you used chlorinated lime, would eliminate the putrid odor on the instrument. So they used chlorinated lime, and death rates just dropped dramatically. And then when they also started cleaning these instruments themselves, it dropped to just virtually zero. And so he was something kind of particles there. It was germs. They didn't know that then, causing these illnesses and so on and so forth. And he put this word out there, but he was just an assistant professor at this university, and the people at the higher levels, and this is something that's called the Semmelweis effect. Throughout history, whenever you have somebody at a lower level coming up with a new idea, it gets rejected by the people above it over and over again. Who do you think you are? You're just some kind of little assistant professor. You're telling us we should wash our hands? There's the door, bucko. Okay, so anyway, there's some other examples of that. So anyway, in his lifetime, his results were never accepted. It wasn't until Pasteur came along and also Lister that it verified germ theory, that the whole thing was finally accepted. And even then, it was slow in getting to the United States. James Garfield, the president, died in part because the American doctors didn't quite believe all these reports coming from London about germ theory, et cetera, et cetera. So there was goofy mistakes, tiny mistakes happening, causing death after thousands and thousands because they had ego and obstinate attitudes, just wouldn't accept the truth, slapping them in the face.
Yeah, similar arrogance that we see today. Some things just don't seem to change no matter what evidence is presented.
It's a part of human nature. Another example of that very thing, was a movie made back in 1942, starring Rosalind Russell, about Sister Kelly. Who was she? She was an Australian bush nurse, and they were saying she was out there without any doctor to give her much guidance. They treat the symptoms of these people that had polio. And so she would use massage and she would do exercise therapy, and she got pretty good results. Back in civilization, they were taking people with polio and putting in these rigid casts to keep their bones from curling. Well, okay, their bones didn't curl, but they couldn't walk either. And her system, which is physical therapy, was when this became accepted and used, but the doctors for years refused to accept it. And even when they accepted it, they kind of accepted it through the back door. There was never an apology issued to Sister Kelly, excuses for not knowing what we're talking about, excuses for rejecting the truth. And so it was just kind of accepted kind of backdoor wise. And now, of course, physical therapy for many years has been a major treatment in polio and other treatments, but it was in defiance of the early medical establishment. She was an example of that same kind of arrogance, the victim of that same kind of arrogance.
In all of the research that you've done between the first and the second book of Tiny Blunders and Big Disasters, were there any mistakes that you found that totally surprised you on the amount of impact that those mistakes made?
Well, the one that comes to mind when you ask that is actually, we have a couple of beneficial tiny mistakes there. We're talking about in the last 100 years, two of the biggest developments in the medical world came as a result of mistakes in the laboratory. One of them a very, very positive outcome. The other one, extremely negative outcome. They go back to London in 1928, kind of city London, and there was a professor Fleming there who was known in St. Mary's Hospital, who was known for keeping a sloppy lab, a kind of a sloppy guy, and he turns out to be kind of the guiding angel of slobs everywhere. But anyway, he was going on vacation, and he left the window of his laboratory open, and he left these dirty dishes, petri dishes, smeared with bacteria, just left them on the cabinet top there. Well, I'll clean it up when I get back. So here's this messy lab. He goes off to Scotland for 2 weeks. I hope he had a happy vacation. And he comes back, and in the meantime, apparently what happened, an open window, a spore, a kind of penicillin spore going in through the window, lands in one of the petri dishes and starts to flourish. He comes back from Scotland. Whoa, what's this? Okay. Oh, wow. The penicillin mold had a halo around it, and it killed all the bacteria surrounding it. There's something in penicillin mold that kills bacteria. And it was a huge, huge breakthrough, one of the biggest breakthroughs in medical history. Discovery of penicillin, discovery of antibiotics, which ended up, it was several different developments that had to take place after that. Took 9 years for it to be perfected, and then produced in mass quantity in 1942. They were able to start turning out millions and millions of dosages and saved countless lives in World War II, and it saved over 500 million, maybe even 1 billion lives since then. So that's a lucky accident in the laboratory that saved lives. On the other side, we have COVID, and we have the Wuhan laboratory there in China, in which they made allowed the COVID to escape, and so far it's killed 15 million people and counting. So it's two mistakes in the laboratory. One has saved 500 million lives or more. The other has cost us 15 million lives and it's still counting. So that's just two tiny mistakes going two different directions.
Wow, those are really cool. Those are really cool examples. What are other examples of, or one or two examples of a tiny mistake that you made a huge positive outcome? I mean, obviously, the accidental discovery of penicillin from mold is a huge, huge positive outcome. What other types of mistakes led to, we can think about mistakes making blunders, but what about turning like unexpectedly positive?
Yes, my emotional favorite book in the chapter in the book is Wrong Way Corrigan. And Wrong Way Corrigan, by the way, is going to be published as an excerpt in the Mensa Bulletin this month. And it's kind of a fun, lighthearted thing. But there was a man who was a mechanic out in California. He'd worked on Lindbergh's plane way back when, and he wanted to fly the Atlantic himself. And so he had this jalopy of a plane that he was patching together this way, patching together that, would take an old used engine, trying to make it a little more powerful, and he would apply for a license, for approval for the government officials back then to fly the Atlantic. And they said, we're not even going to give you approval to fly the plane at all, let alone fly the Atlantic. But anyway, they finally gave him after years of work, gave him an experimental license to fly from California to New York, and he was scheduled then to fly back. When he gets there to New York, and he hasn't given up on his dream, and so he has a leak in the plane he's worried about, but then, okay, he gets it partially repaired. It's time to fly back to California, but he gets in the plane, and instead of flying west to California, he flies east over the open Atlantic, okay, heading towards London. He gets halfway there in his jalopy plane, which is held together with baling wire and tape, no kidding, okay, and the leak is sloshing around. He's feeling a cold chill in his boots and his feet. So he because the leak is sloshing around the bottom of his cabin, so he gets the screwdriver, scrapes a hole in the bottom of the cabin so that the gasoline can leak out over the Atlantic. Okay, and he can't see. He has to stick his head up sideways to see, and so, but sure enough, he flies into Dublin, because the airport there in Dublin, circles, and it just plane, and it has patchwork repairs all over it. And he lands, and he's flying, bent over like this. And customs officials in uniform come up to him, who are you? And what are you doing here? And he said, well, where am I? And they said, you're in Dublin, Ireland. Oh, I was trying to fly to California. They're just in stunned silence. What? What? Of course, nobody believed him, which was part of the fun. So anyway, it was such a huge sensation. He goes back, worldwide fame comes immediately. He goes back to New York. They give him a huge ticker tape parade, a bigger turnout than they had even for Charles Lindbergh. And then RKO Productions comes to contact him for making a movie. He stars in his own movie made by RKO Productions. He has $75,000, which is like $1.5 million today. He goes on to have a citrus farm in California and raise 3 sons. But that was a kind of a thing where he was just a hobo jalopy kind of a guy, and he has this sensational success. So that's kind of a fun chapter.
Wow. Well, your background as an infantry officer in Vietnam, as you know, you have military background. Has that been inspiring you to, because a lot of your stories, even that you've told us here today, have a bit of a military twist to it, or is that what has led you into investigating military blunders?
Well, of course, that's kind of the first main subject that comes out, the mistakes made in war, fortresses with gates not closed, and so on, like that. But I wanted to make a special effort to keep it away from being an entirely military kind of operation, the book itself. We have a section on navigational mistakes. We have Amelia Earhart. We had also the exploring of the South Pole and North Pole. That's in the book. We had the medical mistakes that I mentioned. That's a major part of it as well. Navigational mistakes include Columbus. It is a magnificent mistake. And so I include those as well as the military itself. It's not a military orientation. I think it's more of a historical orientation. And I think the stories are very, I want to say, very interesting, very novel, very catchy, very interesting. It's not like sometimes a standard history book. Sometimes they're very scholarly history books, and I find it boring as hell. And so we were trying to find something fun, interesting, good, engaging stories to tell around the fireplace kind of thing.
That's really interesting. I still find it just fascinating that you were able to dig out and find some of these teeny tiny blunders that we don't normally know about in history. And I think history is not even taught much in schools, even what we would call mainstream history. So
Mhm.
for you to write these books and to bring it to our attention, tells us the full story about what's been going on and what really kind of happened. So I think that's really fascinating.
Yes, I think there's a pull in the direction. I think a lot of our teachers in high school and also in college have a liberal inclination. And so to talk about the story of the American Revolution and the Civil War that says good things about the United States of America and about the flag is considered kind of passe. And therefore, they put an emphasis on different areas there, talking about how Christopher Columbus was an evil person. Well, that's a long story there, but it's been slanted, I think, to the left a little bit in some of our schools. And so that's why it's not getting the support that I think it deserves.
I think you're right. Well, this is a good place to hold that thought, and we're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors at AmericaOutloud.news. It's the sponsors that keeps that platform that hosts our show, and our sponsors that also keep us floating and keep us going with all the things that we're doing. America Out Loud Radio also plays the Tenpenny Files on the iHeartRadio network daily, every day at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen to any of our shows and any of the shows on the America Out Loud.news network by logging into their site and listening through their media player. If you've missed any of our really great conversations that we've had, bringing you just really interesting and offbeat topics, you can find the Tenpenny Files on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, TuneIn, iHeart Virtual Studios, and on my platform at dr10penny.com, where you can hover over the podcast tab and see the guests that are coming up for the next week, and also to log in and watch all of the podcasts there. Or you can find them on dr10penny.substack.com. We also have a place on Rumble and on X, and also now on Instagram. Because there are so many great books and documentaries and so little time to read and to watch shows, this show, the Tenpenny Files, is meant to maximize your time and jumpstart your interest, give you places to go, to follow up, to do the research, and get more education on your own. We have a great message coming from our sponsors. Please listen to them And if you're so inclined to buy, please support us by buying from our sponsors. We will be right back with more from Jared Knott on his book, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2. We will be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out, the heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words, many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking to longtime writer Jared Knott about his book, Tiny Blunders and Big Disasters. It's the second book, the big mistakes that have changed the world forever. Let me tell you just a little bit more about our today's guest, Jared Knott. Jared is a long-term writer who's had numerous articles published in the Mensa Bulletin. He has contributed to graduate school textbooks on subjects ranging from Supreme Court reform to Arctic exploration. He is a decorated combat infantry officer in Vietnam in the 1st Air Cavalry Division. In his civilian career, he has served as a vice president of sales and marketing director for the home improvement industry. Jared, thank you so much for being with us here today. What is it that you would like to add right now about the books that you've been writing?
Well, if people could go to tinyblundersbigdisasters.com, you'll see a lot of fun things there at the website. There's a fun quiz there. There are also the 3 Instagram reels, which is an Elon Musk reel, a John Wayne reel, and also a Roman Empire reel. And we also have a portrait gallery with 27 personalities with a little bit of dirt on each one. So,
Oh,
I'm
that's
kind of kidding about that. There's a dirt on a few of them, but it's kind of a fun thing to read. And we have 4 sample chapters you can read there free of charge. So that's a fun place to visit. And I think of the book as being not something that engages people and it's fun stories to tell at a group or at a party or something like that, as well as fun to read. So that's my whole purpose. I had fun reading it and writing it, and I think I get a lot of feedback from people how it's a very interesting and fun book.
I totally agree with that. That's really, really true. I still find it just fascinating on how you researched and stumbled across these topics because they are so unusual that they aren't just anything that would just hop out of a book or off of a page. How did you become interested in researching these particular topics?
Well, a lot of times it was something I remember reading from years ago, and so that I would dig into it and find a lot of information that way. And once it's funny, when I was writing the first book, the early drafts of it began with a discussing of Professor Lorenz, who is the person that coined the phrase, the butterfly effect. But I spent 3 or 4 or 5 chapters talking about this mathematician, Professor Lorenz. I got real good feedback from the gentleman that wrote the introduction to the book for book 1. He was an editor for Macmillan for 11 years. He said, listen, you're going to bore the heck out of people talking about this mathematician. You need to find something a little bit zippier, a little more exciting. And so I did more research and I came up with something I'd not heard of before. And that was the sinking of the Titanic. And long story short, when they changed second officers just before the voyage, the maiden voyage of the Titanic, and one officer forgot to pass the key to the locker on to the second officer, and the binoculars were in that locker. Well, like people out there on the crow's nest were out there trying to observe by naked eye the Atlantic, looking for icebergs, and they were not in the dark. It was a black iceberg that ended up sinking the Titanic, and they didn't have the binoculars. And one of the gentlemen survived and was being interrogated by the investigating committee, Senate investigating committee in New York after the sinking of the Bismarck. And he said, yeah, we didn't have the binoculars, but how much of a difference that would have made? Well, we'd have seen the iceberg sooner. How much sooner? Well, plenty of time to have gotten out of the way. So if they just had the binoculars, they would have seen the iceberg. They would have known to turn to port that much faster, and the whole disaster would have been avoided, except that the key was not passed along from one officer to the next. That's just one tiny mistake that caused a huge, huge disaster, which is kind of the essence of the book.
Wow, that's interesting. You know, you mentioned in passing the term butterfly effect.
Mm.
What's the butterfly effect in context with human history?
Yes, going back to Professor Lorenz, way back in the 1950s, he was, by the way, one of the leading mathematicians in the world. And back in the 1950s, he was working on a meteorological problem, a weather prediction problem. And he had this number with a decimal and 18 small numbers behind it. And it was taking the computers of the day a real long time to run such a long number. So what he was, those numbers are so small, let me just whack off the last six. Okay, that won't make any difference, and we'll see what happens. Well, it turns out it made a huge, huge difference. Eliminating those six numbers, and Matthew made a big presentation to a group of mathematicians, and he was saying that would mean that little tiny mistake multiply, and has big results in the end. That would mean that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil would set off a chain reaction that could cause a cyclone in Texas a year and a half later. And that was the essence of it. And so the butterfly effect principle came from that, and it certainly applies in history, tiny mistakes having big disasters, as well as in the non-historical world.
And isn't it also an application of, you know, with one little that are tiny little things, which is the premise of your book, that these tiny little changes could just magnify all over the world. We don't have in our own individual lives, we don't have any idea what little steps forward that we could be taking that may make huge differences in our lives in the future.
Yes, and I'll give you, in that connection, I'll give you an example. There was a book entitled The Checklist Manifesto. And it was a doctor who was wondering why the fatality rates were so high in operating rooms, and getting so complicated, so difficult. Maybe it's more than what human beings are going to be able to handle. I wonder how airline pilots handle this same kind of situation. They have to deal with great complexity, and the human mind has to be brought into focus so that we avoid mistake. I wonder what they did. He went over there to Boeing and went back to a famous at the time accident way back in 1936, and it had to do with an early version of the B-17. They called it the B-99 at the time, and there was two of their best pilots flying this plane in its early test runs, and they crashed and burned, and the two pilots were killed. The passengers managed to get out, and what happened was they forgot to turn off the elevator lift, which is part of the automatic pilot system. Okay. And so what can we do to prevent this from happening again? Let's turn to checklists, okay? And so they had a checklist that had like 35, 40 some odd items on it. Okay, the pilot and co-pilot would go over the checklist. Okay, number one, turn off this switch, click, click. Number two is remember to turn off the elevator lift, click, click. And they had like two together to go to these 37 items to make sure nothing was forgotten. The human mind can only think of one thing at a time. You can do two things at once. You can drive a car, and you can listen to the radio. You can do two things at once, but you can't think about two things at the same time. And so if you, in the 37 items that have to be done, if you happen to forget to think of one, your airplane can crash. So the checklist manifesto, the simple ancient tool, made a dramatic difference in reducing airline fatalities. Okay, so the doctor it took it back and applied it to the operating room. Okay, and here's this list 35, 40 items. Let's make sure we have this cart right here. Make sure we have the antibiotics on the cart in case we need them, and the plasma on the cart in case we need it, so on and so forth, like that. And hit all this covered with a checklist, and we review it to begin with. Well, the result was that fatalities in the operating room fell by like 36%. So it had a dramatic success. And now, for a number of years, they're widespread all over the world using the checklist system to handle operations, complicated operations. Another thing they discovered that was useful in saving lives, if everybody in the room introduced themselves, that improved communication, and that was also good for reducing mistakes and misunderstandings. Sometimes people were afraid to question the high and mighty doctor, but everybody introduced themselves and so forth, got a conversation going that improved the lines of communication, and also was useful in saving lives. So that's one way of eliminating tiny mistakes. If you're building a birdhouse, you're building a garden, but you may want to think about checklists even in that situation, or in business applications, to make sure everything is brought into focus, that everything is being handled step by step.
Wow, that's a great outcome from a
Super
blunder.
success. Yeah, the Dr. Atul Gawande, I believe, was the doctor's name. The checklist manifesto.
You know, your first book of Tiny Blunders and was described as heart-stopping, compelling, and fun.
You bet.
Would you say that book two? That's a good description for book two, also.
Yes, and I tell people that the book 2 is my 10,000 hour book. I'm very proud of book 1. I thought it was an excellent book, but you get better as you do things and go along. And after 10,000 hours, I think book 2 has even outdone book 1. And we're very hopeful of a lot of awards. The first book won 7 awards, and we're hoping to do that well or maybe better with book number 2. And so we're hoping to the 2 books together. We hope it's going to exceed $100,000 and 100,000 units of total sales. So we're very excited about the prospects, and it's a fun book to read. With that, I added a little bit of poetry to book 2, and got some good results on that.
So, what awards did your first book win?
Yes, there was the New Generation Indie Award, and it was one of the books that won Best History Book. We won a number of others. So there was also the Georgia Writers Association and so on like that. So we had a number of awards there. If you go to the website, they're all listed there.
That's really great. That's really great. And so, what else would you like people to know about these books, about how you wrote them, how you got to that point? What else would you like them to know about your two really compelling books, Tiny Blunders and Big Disasters, book 1 and book 2?
Yes, there's one chapter. It's actually chapter 24, but the title of it is the 27 Club. And it has to do about the many lives that have been lost due to substance abuse. And I think that every young person maybe should read that chapter. It starts off an interesting tale about Chris Christopherson and how he wrote this book. Of course, Molly, so it's best for you to read it. It's everybody trying to retell it, because again, I'm not going to do it justice, but the basic message there is that if people sometimes take substance, alcohol, smoking cigarettes, smoking pot, so on and so forth, to make themselves feel emotionally comfortable with all the emotions of their body. But if they were to exercise on a regular basis, weightlifting on a regular basis, it actually, for young people, it's important. It makes them look a lot better. The studies show it gives you a lot of rich color to your face, and also makes you much more relaxed. You have the endorphins, you have the dopamine, and you have the serotonin in your system. They give you a very relaxed feeling, and that's a much better alternative for feeling good than taking substance abuse of different kinds. And so that's an important message, I think, for young people to read. And it's a tiny blunder of taking that first pill or making that first injection that can have catastrophic results. The 27 Club is a listing of all the people who died young at the age of 27, Janis Joplin being, I guess, one example, Jim Morrison and so on like that, who died as a result of substance abuse, and they went on to live very happy lives, except for that tiny mistake. Is
there a book 3 in the wings?
Well, my wife told me if I write another book, she's going to leave me. He said, you sit there in that 4-foot world. The first book one, I had 5 children still at home, and I had a full-time job, and I had a wife who needs attention. Book 2, the children are gone on their own. God bless them. I'm retired, and now in retirement, enjoying my retirement, but I still have a wife who needs attention. Okay, and she was telling me, you spend all your time writing another book. I'm kidding, right? But she's going to, does not want me to write another book. But maybe in a year or two, I have another book that I started. It was a different subject altogether. And it's the hushed up murders of famous people. They murdered big and got away with it, which is an interesting book, kind of going in a different direction. But maybe if I am real nice to the boss, maybe I'll be able to write that book in the next year or two.
That's really good. Well, tell us a little bit about your background in terms of you've contributed on such wide subjects between Supreme Court reform and Arctic exploration. Tell us about what you have been writing about for the Mensa Bulletin.
Yeah, of course, they're going to publish Wrong Way, Corrigan is the chapter of publishing. It's coming out the 21st of this month. And then I wrote years ago, wrote an article for the Mensa Bulletin about Arctic exploration. And then I have a chapter on that subject talking about Captain Scott and the South Pole. And there was a series of small mistakes, and I could start to say it's a fascinating read, I think, about the fact that another connected subject there. I write a chapter in the book about lions led by donkeys. And what that means, it refers to the fact that the British soldiers, as tough and as skilled, courageous as any soldiers in the world, but their generals historically have been very, very poor. And why is that? They draw their officers of war from a very narrow kind of genetic pool. You have to be a wealthy person, upper middle class, or wealthy person to be able to afford the uniforms, social engagements, et cetera, to be able to get your commission in the British system. The American system, of course, West Point is 100% paid for. Not only is everything free, they actually even pay a salary to the cadets, and they have other scholarships, ROTC programs, et cetera. So we draw our officers from sometimes very impoverished backgrounds, as well as middle class, as well as upper class. Omar Bradley came from a very poor family. Eisenhower came from a working class family, and others also Pershing as well from just kind of a middle class family. They could never have afforded to become commissioned in the British system. So the American officers did not think very much of the British officers, even to this day. They did not have a good record. Going back to the Charge of the Light Brigade, example of very poor leadership on the part of the British generals. And so sometimes the men in the field, tough and strong, save them from themselves, but it's kind of a bad situation. Transferring that to the exploration of the South Pole, I'm not sure they had the best leadership in the world from Captain Scott, who made a series of mistakes that led to tragic results. So that's an interesting dynamic talking about the importance of leadership and the importance of drawing your leadership corps, your officer corps, from a broad range of the society and not just a narrow range.
How did you come across, or what did you write about with the Supreme Court reform? Because we've had so much trouble with our courts here lately, historically, we've got activist judges and, things like that. What did you say in your writings about Supreme Court reform?
Yes, the Constitution of the United States, brilliant document, is a system of checks and balances. Every part of government, including the voters themselves, has a check and a balance against it. The House of Representatives, of course, they get reelected every 2 years, but they can't pass legislation by themselves. The Senate, 1/3 gets elected every 2 years. They can't pass anything without the approval of the House of Representatives. And of course, it has to be approved by the President of the United States. Each one of those cases, they can, one power has to be, has a check and balance against the other. In federal courts, though, when it comes to the Supreme Court, there is a very weak kind of check and balance against rulings from the Supreme Court. It's almost impossible to have a constitutional amendment to overcome a decision by the Supreme Court. And the original, whether you agree or disagree, the original ruling justifying abortion was really based on kind of a fictional kind of background. It was a right to privacy or warranty. You had to have a warrant to search and seize and so on. So it wasn't very much substance there, but it was put in place because the sentiment on the court was in favor of allowing abortions. And so whether it was a good decision or a bad decision, it was done without much substance behind it. And if it had an opportunity for checks and balances, maybe if 60% of the Congress and the Senate would want to overturn it or something like that, it might not have gone through. So that's one of the main points I was making in that article. It was written over 10 years ago. But of course, you could argue the other way. Maybe it was a good decision, but just didn't have good substance behind it in terms of its legal support.
So are there any particular current day modern topics that you're really working on?
Well, of course, the book covers a whole bunch of them. There's one article in there that had to do with October the 7th, in which I'll kind of wade into some current politics to some extent. Not everybody's happy with that chapter, but I was saying basically that the Israelis, known for being extremely well developed in terms of their intelligence system, being able to see around the corner into the Arab world. In that particular situation, they completely lowered their guard. Maybe it was a question of the success that is the victory syndrome. And when you get so many successes, one after the other, you may start to get complacent. You may start to think you don't have to make any further improvements to what you're doing. And so you can be blindsided by something you didn't see coming down the road that may have been victory disease. They call it victory disease, maybe what affected the Israeli situation, not being able to see what was coming, because there was evidence, by the way, on that subject, in almost every surprise attack in history, going back over years, is almost without exception, there were early indications that something was coming, and it was just ignored by the people in control there. We all want to sleep well at night. We all want to feel well rested and not too worried. And here's coming these early indications that there's a problem coming down the way. And so often they're put in the wrong context, or so often we take counsel from our wishes rather than from our fears. And here comes this gigantic surprise. And that's what happened on October the 7th. You could argue it happened when World War II and Pearl Harbor. That's a whole different subject. I won't get into that. But example after example throughout history, that seems to be the case. People just weren't quite paying attention to the early signals that were coming in that trouble was on the way.
Wow. Well, those are all really important topics that we're really glad you're covering, and we hope that your wife gives you grace and allows you to write a third book, because these topics are so important. We've got just about 2 minutes left in our time here today, Jared. Tell us what the best place for people to go to buy Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, both book 1 and book 2, the many tiny mistakes that changed the world forever. Where's the best place that people should go?
Yes, you can go directly to Amazon, but I think my favorite recommendation is to go to the website, tinyblundersbigdisasters.com. And it has a fun quiz there. It has a portrait gallery that I mentioned there. It has a book trailer there. It has the 3 Instagram reels, which are a lot of fun to watch there, especially the John Wayne one, I think. And then it has the 4 chapters there. One way Corrigan is one of the chapters being sampled there. And so you can go there, you can have a fun time. And you can see my list of my awards there and enjoy it that way. We have a special that we're running this week, and so you can get it a little bit cheaper than the regularly could, both the electronic version and also the written version. Now, the electronic version has color pictures in it, and sometimes, in some ways, it's more fun to read. We start off with a volcano, okay, in chapter 1, which is kind of fun to read about. The human race was nearly made extinct 70,000 years ago by the Toba volcano. We came within, they think there was only about 5 or 10,000 early versions of human beings left after the volcano, because it caused this huge nuclear winter, blotted out the sun for months and months and months. All the crops failed, the animals crashed and died. Human beings were hanging on by the fingernails, and just a little bit of a push in the wrong direction, our ancestors wouldn't be here, it wouldn't have been there, and we wouldn't be here either. But that was kind of starts with the book starts with a bang there. And again, that's I think a fun part of the book.
Well, that's really great. So it's for the audience, say your website one more time.
It's at Tiny Blunders, bigdisasters.com. Tiny Blunders, bigdisasters.com. And you can go there and have a blast. Have a blast.
Book one and book two directly from you?
Yes, absolutely. Right.
Tell our listeners, when I was doing our other podcast was called This Week with Dr. T and also Happy Hour with Dr. T. We interviewed a lot of authors there, and I would always tell our audience, go to Amazon, read the reviews, then go to the author's site, buy directly from the author because Amazon takes a big cut of their sales price. Then if you like the book and you're really enjoying it, go back to Amazon and write a review because the reviews really help with the sales and really help people know, even if it's just a sentence or two, that I really enjoyed this book, or maybe in this case, your favorite blunder that you picked out from reading all these different things, what you liked about it and why. So I think that that's really important for these two books in particular because they are really delightful to read. And I've really enjoyed having Jared on our show today. So with that, I want to close out with one of our favorite verses from the Bible that I close all my podcasts with, whether they are live or pre-recorded, which is rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. It's a simple message from Romans 12:12 that can apply to all circumstances. Lean into God, trust Him for everything. He will never let you down. So we'll see you here tomorrow, same place, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, through AmericaOutloud.news, iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcast platform. Or you can find them at drtenpenny.com. You can find them on Rumble. You can find them on X. We're trying to make these widely available so that you really have a lot of different choices and different things to learn and study about, get some laughter about, and really expand your horizons, because these are not books that you might generally walk into Barnes and Nobles and pick off the shelf. And that's what we're trying to do, is to give you education and some real different perspectives. Please go to drtenpenny.com if you want to find out more about me and about the work that we do. You can find my book there, Zero Accountability in a Failed System. You can sign up for our Substacks, which is drtenpenny.substack.com and tenpennywalkwithgod.substack.com. They're both totally free. We always take donations, which is great, but for most part, they're free. If I'm going to spend the time writing it, I really want you to read it. So I don't believe in paywalls. We'll have you there to come and get some education and have a lot of fun. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. We will see you here tomorrow at 3 p.m. or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. Thank you so much. Goodbye and God bless.